first thing that is glaring when we study this week's Torah portion of Balak is the very name. Balak is the king of Moab, who hires Balaam, the heathen prophet, to curse the Jews. This man had a pathological hatred for the Jewish people, and yet the Torah portion is named Balak. And Torah portion names are not arbitrary. They're not just the first word of a parsha. The first word is Vayar, and he saw. Yet it's named Balak because the theme of the parsha revolves around Balak. So the question is, why would we want to name a Torah portion after such a wicked person? We never give the credit and glorify someone who is evil. To give a name of a Torah portion, we have names like Pinchas. Next week will be Pinchas. He was a righteous person. We have Chayesara. We have Yisro. But why name a Torah portion after a wicked man like Balak? So one explanation is that Balak, even though he was evil, he did bring sacrifices to God. And one could think, so what's the big deal? He brought sacrifices, but his intentions were negative, and he did so many other horrible things. But this is to teach us a very powerful lesson, that every mitzvah that you do has value. Even if you did so many terrible transgressions, that one mitzvah that you did, God will never remain ungrateful for that one mitzvah. God will reward you for that one mitzvah. What was his reward? That his descendant of Balak was Ruth, who was the mother and the ancestress of King David, leading ultimately to the coming of Mashiach. So Balak gets the credit for the little thing that he did to teach us how important a little thing is. And we find this teaching in the words of the Rambam. In the days of the Rambam, in the 12th century, the Almohads, they were like the ISIS, Al-Qaeda people, the fanatical Muslims who forced people into conversion to Islam. This happened in the 12th century, centuries before the Christians imposed forced conversion to Catholicism in Spain. The Almohads did that already in the 12th century. And as a result, many Jews publicly professed to be Muslims to save their lives, but privately they kept their Judaism. But they felt very guilty. They felt they were hypocrites. So they wrote a letter to a rabbi whose name we don't know, who lived outside of that country, who was not suffering the same fate as the Jews in Spain. And when they approached him and asked him about their status, he said, you might as well convert entirely because your mitzvahs have no value. And this really upset the Rambam, Maimonides, who was a young man. He was in his late teens or early 20s. And he wrote a scathing letter criticizing that rabbi. And he said even Yeravim ben Nevat was considered to be the most evil of Jewish kings. He was the king at the time of the split of Israel into two kingdoms. He rebelled against God. He caused others to sin. You can't imagine how evil he was. And yet, Maimonides writes, based on earlier Talmudic sources, he will be held accountable for even not following a rabbinical mitzvah. There's no such thing as God says it's not important. It's either everything or nothing. And by the same token, it goes the other way around. And even if you feel you're a lost cause, nevertheless, your one little mitzvah has value. And it has even more meaning in light of the Rambam's ruling, which is based on the Gemara and the Talmud, that a person should look at himself and the whole world as if it's evenly balanced between good and evil. And that one mitzvah, a feather of a mitzvah, could tip the scales in favor of merit, in favor of salvation. So you never know that despite how low you may feel you are, and no one can be as low as Yeravim ben Nevat, but even if you would be on the lowest of levels, and you think you're on the lowest of levels, that one mitzvah that you will do has infinite value. And that lesson we can learn from Balak, that even though he was a vile person, because he did one mitzvah to serve God, God says, I'll reward you in the future, but I'll give you the ability to get the glory that they're going to name a Torah portion after you. The Rebbe gives another explanation. He says, what happened with Balak? He hires Balaam. What did Balaam do? Balaam, instead of cursing the Jews, he blessed them. And among his blessings was the coming of Mashiach. And what's the whole idea of Mashiach? Is we take all the negative, all the darkness, and it will be transformed into light. So Balak, not only did he do a mitzvah, that he brought sacrifices, and he did serve God in some minimal way, but he also brought about the ultimate goal of the blessings that were uttered by Balaam that will lead us inevitably, imminently, to the coming of Mashiach. Now, the Talmud tells us something very sad. Balaam wanted to curse us, but instead of curses, only blessings came out of his mouth. But what were his intentions? His intentions were to curse. So the Talmud says that all of his blessings reverted to curses, because that's really what he had in mind. So even though God forced him to give blessings, the blessings did not last. They turned into curses. With one exception, the blessing, Matovu Ohalecha Yaakov, Mishkanosecha Yisrael, how goodly are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel, that blessing never reverted to a curse. And we always had that blessing being fulfilled. Why is that blessing any different? So let's try to understand what that blessing was. There are two, among other interpretations, there are two that stand out. One interpretation is that he's talking about the Jewish homes. When he looked at the Jewish encampment in the desert, he saw that no Jew pitched his tent where the entrance faced the entrance of his neighbor's tent. And he saw this as a pattern throughout the entire Jewish nation, that no one wanted to invade the privacy of the other. This is a sign of modesty, a sign of respect for the other person's privacy and integrity. And he was impressed by that. And that's when he said, how goodly are your tents, O Jacob. How wonderful are your dwelling places, O Israel. Look how wonderful you are. That blessing never reverted to a curse. And you'll ask, why not? Why didn't it revert to a curse? So the answer could be, all of his other blessings, those were words that were spoken by God through him. He was only the mouthpiece, like the donkey that opened its mouth to speak. He was the donkey. God was demonstrating to him, you're no better than your donkey. A donkey can speak if I want it to speak, and I want you to speak. So you'll say what I want you to say. But the blessing of how goodly are your tents, I'm suggesting Balaam was really moved by that. When he saw that, he was impressed. He saw something remarkable, because it's a human nature to be voyeuristic, to want to see what's going on in someone else's life, to invade the privacy of others. But when he saw that the Jewish people were different, it moved him to express the praise of the Jewish people for having such beautiful homes where privacy is preserved and respected. And that's why there was nothing negative. The blessings that he vocalized were blessing, and even his intentions were not as vile as they were for the other blessings that were originally intended as curses. But then there's another interpretation of what it means, how goodly are your tents and your dwelling places, that it refers to the Bati Knesiyos, or Bati Midrashos, the houses of worship, prayer, and the houses of Torah study, that the Jewish people would always have these houses in which they praise God, they pray to God, in which they study his Torah. That curse never reverted back to curses. That blessing, which originally started off as in his mind as a curse, that never reverted to a curse. And the question is, why not? Why didn't that blessing cease? Because in Balaam's mind, he intended that to be a curse. So one may suggest the following. The Gemara says tells a story that Rabbi Yochanan, who lived in Israel, Rabbi Yochanan was the first generation of Amoraim, of the interpreters of the Mishnah, the Talmudic sages, and he lived in Israel, and he was also the editor of the Jerusalem Talmud. And he was told that there were some old people living in Babylonia, and he was amazed. He says, how could there be old people in Babylonia? In the Torah it says, in the Shema, L'man yirbi yemechem v'benechem al ha'adama, that your lives and your lives of your children will be lengthened on the land of Israel. You're not living in Israel. How could you have longevity? And when they told him that the people in Bavel get up early to go to the synagogues or the houses of study, and they stayed late, he says, now I understand, because they're in the synagogue. So what kind of explanation is that? They did many other mitzvahs. Just because they get up early to go to the synagogue, that would mean that they're going to have longevity, something that is reserved for the people in Israel. And commentaries explain that the Beis HaMedrash and the Beis HaKnesses, the synagogue and the house of study, are actually parts of Israel. In what way? The Talmud says that when Mashiach comes, all the synagogues, all the houses of study will be transported to Eretz Yisrael, to the land of Israel. So they're already connected to Israel. And because they're connected to Israel, I would like to use the analogy, they were like embassies. A foreign embassy is really the property of the country whose embassy it is. So the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. is really part of Israel. Geographically, it's thousands of miles away, but it legally is the property of Israel, and likewise for other countries. So our synagogues, our houses of study, our yeshivas, our institutions that are devoted to the study of Torah and prayer are actually part of Israel. So that's what Rabbi Yochanan understood. If these people stay in the shul, they wake up early in the morning to go to shul and they stay late, then obviously they are in Israel. For all intents and purposes, they are breathing the air of Israel as it is situated as an embassy in a foreign country. And that's where they're entitled to the reward or the blessing of living long lives. And that explains why Balaam, even though he intended it as a curse, that there should be no synagogues, that blessing never ceased. Why? Because when you're dealing with a synagogue, you're dealing with Israel. And Israel is the land that the Torah says God watches over from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. God's presence is always revealed. And in the presence of God, when God is revealed, there are no curses. There's a famous story of the Mittler Rebbe, the second Chabad Rebbe. When he was a child, he heard someone read the curses in the book of Deuteronomy, and he was so horrified by those curses that he fainted and was ill for weeks because he couldn't tolerate the harsh language the Torah uses. And someone asked him, last year you heard the same Torah reading and it didn't affect you. He says, last year my father read the Torah, and when father reads the Torah, there are no curses. And what he meant was, number one, when a father reads the Torah, and number two, when God, who is our Father in heaven, from God, our Father in heaven, what sounds like curses are actually hidden blessings. And therefore, when you are living in the land of Israel, where you have a direct connection to God, there are no curses. Yes, you still have free choice. You can always bring the curse if you want into the land, but the land naturally is a land that flows only blessings. It says in the Torah, in the book of Deuteronomy, Re'eh, behold, I am placing before you today a blessing and a curse. And the Aramaic translator, known as Yonatan ben Azil, translate the word curse, klala, not as curse, but as exchange. So the Rebbe explains, when God says, I am giving you, God does not give us curses. He gives us blessings, but we could exchange the blessing through our behavior into a curse. But the natural state of when God bestows upon us, he only bestows upon us positive energy, blessings. And therefore, when you are in a shul, in a place of house of study, you are in Israel, and God's relationship with you is a direct one, and there are no curses except the curses that we ourselves impose on the place. But naturally, that's a place that beyond and transcends curses. And that's why that didn't revert to a curse. Even though Balaam had in mind that it should be a curse, once you have the blessing of the houses of study and the houses of worship, you are now in Israel, and you're subject to the dynamic of Israel where the curses there are not natural. The natural state is a state of blessing. In the diaspora, it doesn't necessarily work that way unless it's in a shul or a house of study. The Rebbe would always emphasize that when the Talmud says that when Mashiach comes, all the synagogues and all the houses of study will be transported to the land of Israel, the Rebbe says that that's not only restricted to a synagogue, even your home. If you use your home for prayer, and that's what the Rebbe emphasized, the need that even children should have in their room a prayer book. If the home is used for the study of Torah and other acts of kindness and mitzvahs, hospitality and the like, then you turn your home into a minor sanctuary. It becomes a little Beis Hamikdash. You're now in Israel, and therefore you're entitled to all the blessings, including the ultimate blessing that we will be transported with our homes into the land of Israel with the imminent coming of Mashiach.